It was the glory days. It was a wonderful time. It was a time of peace and prosperity. It was a time of rejoicing and revelry. It was the time when Amos was sent to the northern kingdom to convict them in their time of goodness and to call them to remember the teachings of of God, as Jesus echoes in our gospel story today. Amos was a shepherd, and he was sent to the northern kingdom, even though he lived just south of Bethlehem in a very small village. He was a shepherd with not great education, but somehow God chose him to go and speak to the people in the northern country because they were living in a good time. They were living so that they forgot the callings of God. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, that you start to get so satisfied and so comfortable in all the goodness that's come to you, the many blessings, that you forget to give thanks to God and to look about for those things that God calls us to do, for the widow and the orphan, for the poor and the outcast. And that's what was happening for the people in the kingdom that Amos was sent to. They were living under the rule of Jeroboam II, and things had been good. They'd had some wars that had brought in some new territories. They'd had wonderful rains so that their harvests had been plentiful. Their tables were full. Their fields were filled with flocks. All seemed to be good in their households, and yet they forgot that not all are always included. One of my favorite theologians is Soren Kierkegaard, and he wrote something. The Bible is very easy to understand, but we Christians are a bunch of scheming swindlers. We pretend to be unable to understand it because we know very well that the minute we understand, we are obliged to act accordingly. You know, somebody else once said, it's not the parts of the Bible that I don't understand that bother me. The parts of the Bible that bother me are the parts that I do understand because they convict us. Way back in 1991, when I first went to the country of Slovakia just after the Velvet Revolution, I was reading a book that had just come out and become popular. It's very old now. It's called The Giver. Some of you read it? Up there, confirmation students and everybody, yes. The Giver, it's a wonderful read, and it's even been made into a movie now, of course. What I remember about The Giver is that in their world they had lost color. Everything was black and white. And when I was on the bus driving from Austria into Slovakia, I felt like I entered into that land. I felt like everything was black and white. The only color were a few geraniums every once in a while. They just seemed to not have, after 50 years of communism, the kinds of things that would make their society better. For heaven's sakes, they didn't even have the kind of toilet paper we have. They just had little squares of wax paper. I worked on the language, Slovak language, enough that I got to go on trips. And one of the trips I got to go on was when every spring, the children got to go 2 weeks out into the country to march, to breathe in the good air and get out of the big city. So I got to go along. It was wonderful for me because I saw parts of that country that many people didn't get to see. Well, one day, you had classes in the morning, and in the afternoons, you got to go exploring. So one afternoon, we went to a UNESCO village. We were in the Tatra Mountains, where the far side of the Tatra Mountains was Poland, but we were on the Slovakia side of the Tatras. We climbed and climbed. You know when you're climbing so hard that it starts to hurt to breathe? We climbed and climbed, and it was an incline like I couldn't believe. I saw a shepherd with his flock, and one leg was down, and the other leg was completely bent up. because the hill was so steep. We climbed and climbed and climbed, and when I thought I was about to die, we finally got to this village. It was a village that seemed like it had been forgotten. It was a UNESCO village, a heritage site that was being protected by the United Nations because, as the legend went, during World War II, a skier got lost, which is very easy to do in the Tatra Mountains, and found this village. And this village was made up of 9 families that didn't even know World War I had happened, let alone World War II. There was no electricity. There was no running water. They lived in this village in isolation. They even had a more pure Slovak language than the language that the people down in the cities had. It was a fascinating visit to walk into a place that seemed to have been suspended in time. As Amos went into the North Country to talk to the people about their sins, he was a great orator. He began by condemning all those nations around them. He talked about those in Damascus and Gaza, in Tyre and Edom, the Ammonites, the Moabites. He talked about how they were so immoral. They were selling their prisoners into slavery. They were using ruthless war tactics. They were even ripping open the bellies of pregnant women. And he condemned them for their sins. And everybody, can you imagine them cheering? Yeah, that's right. And then Amos began to speak to the people about their own sin. And their sin was that they were not following the laws of God. They were not helping the poor. They were not looking for justice for all, but only for themselves. Here's some of Amos's words from the 6th chapter. Alas for those who lie on beds of ivory and lounge on their couches. They eat lambs from the flock and calves from the stall, who sing idle songs to the sound of the harp, and like David, improvise on instruments of music, who drink wine from bowls and anoint themselves with the finest oils, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph, the ruin of many. And from the 2nd chapter, they sell the righteous, the innocent who have done no wrong, for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample the poor into the dust of the earth and push the afflicted out of the way. Suddenly, the accusations from Amos are toward the people about their very own lives. And he calls them to not be worried about what's going to happen after you die. Oh no, that shouldn't be your biggest concern. Your biggest concern should be today and tomorrow. For the Lord will send you into exile. The Lord will send warring tribes into your land. And not only will your peace be gone, but your freedom will be gone as well. He calls them to change their ways, to pay attention to what's going on, to no more spend their days idly singing useless songs and doing rituals and sacrifices without thought, but instead to look for the ways of God. For you see, they turned their faith into pride and their justice into poison. They trampled the poor and abused the needy. It's very interesting in this time and period of our country right now with all the crazy commercials and the vitriol language that's going on in the debates and, all the phone calls. Are you getting phone calls? I took a sign out of our corner right here for one of the candidates because I thought, good Christians vote, but we don't really tell people how to vote. I wonder if this whole nation would stop and sit down and read the book of Amos in these days, what that might do for people. Here's the other thing that happened in Slovakia. We Americans used to get together and have these great discussions, and we would talk about big topics. One of the topics that came up over and over and over is how ethnocentric we were. Ethnocentricity is this belief that we are better than everybody else. It's this perceived idea that another's culture, another's race, another's way of living is inferior to ours because we are so comfortable in what we have. It took me a very long time, years of listening and learning and trying to understand the beauty of another culture and to try to understand how really good we Americans are at being ethnocentric, to call ourselves to think of another way. Certainly, we in the United States enjoy freedom and civic accountability, and we have much prosperity. But because of that, if that is true, we are duty-bound. We are duty-bound to be accountable and to think about the other among us. We often talk about our own sins, the individual sin of people. Maybe it'd be someone entering, a post office with a gun and killing people. Maybe it's someone starting fires and burning down people's homes. That kind of individual sin. But Amos is calling the world to understand the sin of a nation, corporate sin, the structure of injustice that we can accidentally find ourselves in. We are called by Amos and by Jesus today to live with social responsibility, to regard our planet and its resources as that which we are to protect and learn how to share. There are corporate sins or large sins like oil spills that will hurt the world for hundreds of years. There are stories of the World Bank making decisions based on how to get more instead of how to give more. These are the kinds of things that we have to pay attention to because of our many blessings. For you see, Jesus has called us to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Amen.